Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the morning program of the Big Challenge Science Festival. Today's overall theme is the digital future. But this morning we have some very special guests, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce the first of those, which is State Secretary Atle Hamar from the Ministry of the Environment and Climate. State Secretary Hamar. Have fun.
Thank you very much. And dear organizers and participants of this Big Challenge Science Festival. Very nice name, Big Challenge Science Festival. That's a good title. So thank you very much for the invitation, and even though I'm very happy to be here, today's theme has a serious and potential catastrophic backdrop. On May 6th this year, the UN, the IPBES, presented its first report on the state of the world's nature. Finally, we got the same kind of report as we have had for the climate science. And the report tells us a bleak story. Of the 8 million plant and animal species that live on our planet, 1 million are now threatened with extinction. 1 million is threatened. And the state of nature is only getting worse. The situation is no less than alarming. Taking care of nature is crucial to our existence and our welfare. It's also the whole foundation of the economy. We must act now before it's too late. And if we heed the call, we can still save the nature. The practice of discovery and description of species is crucial for our understanding of the natural world. Unfortunately, there are large gaps of knowledge about the world species. And new technology can, however, help close this gap. And I really hope new technology and the barcoding that we heard about can really help politicians in all countries to make the right decisions to bring this work forward. Today's keynote speaker, Janzen, is a legend of nature conversation. For nearly 60 years, he has done fieldwork in Costa Rica together with his wife, Winnie, and colleagues. And also been an advisor to the Costa Rican Minister of Energy and Environment, who I had the honor to meet during the minister meeting in Canada a couple of months ago, hosted by Canada's Environmental Minister, Catherine McKenna. And we had a nice speech together, nice talk and together about different items, but also this. And Janzen, he's a pioneer in using new technology in nature conservation. The DNA barcode to record species. And for me, this is also quite new information. I did not have any knowledge of this before I came into the ministry in January 2018 last year, when Liberal Democrats joined the government. And then I came into this, work with the ecological maps. And then we go on with this item. What you do, Janzen, with your colleagues are now very well underway to record all living creatures living in Costa Rica. And Costa Rica can thus become the first tropical country in the world to know what species they have and to make Costa Ricans the first bioliterate people of the world. This is no less than a formidable task. Although Costa Rica is a small country, number 129 in the world, about 7 times as small as Norway, it has as much as 4% of the world's biodiversity. Knowledge is important if we are to reverse the negative trend of the world's nature. With more knowledge, we also get a better basis for decision making. And Norway is one of several countries that now will strengthen our efforts to save the world's nature. The international community will face this challenge in China next year. In China, we will have what we call a COP meeting on biodiversity. A new global biodiversity framework is to be negotiated. And as a preparation to these negotiations, we are hosting a large conference here in Trondheim in a couple of weeks, beginning of July, where both negotiators and a group of environment ministers are invited. So Mr. Ola Elvestuen, who is the Minister of Climate and Environment, has invited ministers and state secretaries to a high-level meeting in Trondheim and to make this as a kind of pre-COP to the China conference in 2020. If our work is to succeed, we need dedicated scientists as Dan Janzen. We need people to fight for nature, and we need people who see potential in new technology to achieve this. So, it's with a great honor I introduce you all to our keynote speaker at the big challenge, Dan Janzen. Floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you very much for that very flattering introduction. Winnie and I are field biologists. We spend our lives in the forest. We live in the forest. We come out of the forest now and then to the village, which is where we are at this moment. And seeing the word big challenge up there on the screen just before when I was sitting there, it occurs to me that the real big challenge is how do we get humanity to permit the wild world that created us, but we have spent probably 200,000 years, 300,000 years at least, pushing away, to get rid of it, to make room for us. Suddenly, we're realizing that by pushing it away and getting rid of it, we're damaging ourselves very badly. So suddenly, all our instincts, all our genome, all our behavior, all our cultures are based on push it away. How do we get it to be a welcome member of the human community? That's a big, big order. To me, that's the big challenge because it goes against all of human nature. Okay? So, this is the sort of dry, formal title for what I'm talking about today. The emphasis there is on the word tropical. The emphasis is on bioliterate. Bioliterate is the same thing as literate, but now literate about biology. And then how do we save its biodiversity? And the save it part is what I just referred to as getting humanity to be willing to leave it in the room, allowing it to be at the negotiating table. Okay? That's the real challenge, in my opinion. This is the formal Costa Rican way of looking at this challenge. Because for them, the challenge is right there, in country. All the stuff that lives right around them. It's not really the whole world. We're focused on something that influences the whole world, but a country itself is focused on itself. And the key words here are development of itself, for itself, and then to be an example for the world of non-destructive use of wild biodiversity. Why did I put the word use in there? Because we welcome what is useful. We welcome hospitals, highways, schools, the police, fire departments, all these things, the computerization, we welcome those things and we keep them. we have to come to some reason to welcome wild biodiversity also. Okay? Now, there's an origin to this fact that we're here on the stage talking to you. In 1985, this fellow here, who was now deceased but was the director of the Costa Rican National Park Service, asked us to go and do an environmental impact statement about the invasion of a very important national park by 1,500 gold miners. Okay? And so as biologists, we agreed to go do that. Not as conservation biologists, not concerned about gold mining and damage to a park, but because we were asked by the government to do it. Please, okay? Well, this is the Corcovado of the park we knew. Pristine and beautiful. Nature as the very best. The wild tropical rainforest. What we met when we got there is this. And in meeting these people, we had 1 week, so we decided to study the people like they were animals. And we asked, really, why are you here? Why are you knowingly inside a national park? And the answer came back basically because this park has no use to society. So we feel morally okay. It's reasonable for us to be here. That caused us to think about what kind of a national park can survive humanity. What kind of a national park can? Which then that led us to realize that this is where the important word lies. You all know what gardens are. Your society has known what gardens are for hundreds of thousands of years. They're in your society. You protect them, you invest in them, you think about them, you plant from them, you harvest from them. You protect them from others as well. Well, if you started viewing nature as a garden, then all these operators that I just mentioned are still already there in the society. We don't have to invent them for new. Okay? So somehow in 85, this is a year now, notice that, 1985, that's quite a long time ago. What does a park need to be? Big for biology, but it has to be big enough to tolerate the footprints of people. So it's not a set-aside, it's a place that's used in one way or another, okay? It's got to be paying its own bills. It's not a parasite on society. All the things we like and keep in society are not parasites. We're willing to fund them because they mean something to us. And finally, it's got to be integrated with the society, not set aside in a chest of gold in the bottom basement of the bank with a gun in front of it. Okay? What that leads to is asking, what is the resource? What is the wild raw material? Well, this is Costa Rica, a little tiny thing. There's it up there transposed in the United States. And real estate is nothing, absolutely nothing. I'm sure there are counties in Norway which are bigger than the country of Costa Rica. Okay? But if you look at the biodiversity in that little package, it's equal to all of that of North America. There are more species living within 50 kilometers of our house in Costa Rica than there is in all of Europe. All of Europe, within an hour's drive of our house in Costa Rica. So that's the raw material that nature has to work with to offer society. If society can learn to work with it rather than clear it. Okay? So this word right here gets stuck on this word right here. That word right there is literacy in Spanish. And this is a Spanish culture, and that is where we're working. I convert this to English for you all, but the real message is in Spanish, okay? And bio, in front of bioliterate, you all understand what bioliterate would mean. Well, bioalphabetización is just the same thing in Spanish. So from that comes the title of this activity, BioAlpha, which is being carried out by Costa Rica today. Okay? So in fact, Winnie and I are lawyers representing Costa Rica in a bigger arena, okay? So what does BioAlpha offer Costa Rica itself? First is there are 5 million people in Costa Rica that they come to understand what is this raw resource that they can actually work with. What is it? BioAlpha is set to give them bioliteracy. Okay? The second thing is it's a knowledge platform for all the detailed uses that this can come from. Not only an appreciation that it's possible, but to give the actual mechanics, the stuff that you can do it with. And the conference that we are in here, over in the other building, is one about the engineering of that. It's about the details of how you do this stuff. And the final one right here is to make Costa Rica be a noticeable leader in an example, in an exemplary way for the world. Costa Rica is tiny, so tiny, has no chance at all of surviving as a powerhouse. Its only function, its only survival value is as being an example for how you could do stuff, okay? It got rid of its army and invented Social Security and all those kinds of things previously of the same mode. So we start out with this little piece of national park way back in the 70s, and this was a classic national park with guns and a barbed wire fence, and that was it, okay? Classical national park. And over the next 35 years, Costa Rica has taken the things you would have in mind if you were building a big 5-star hotel. Who are the clients? Where are they going to park? How much will they pay? What do they want? Why do they stay? How much staff do you have to have? What does the staff have to know how to do? All the things you have to think in mind if you were a commercial operation doing that, we do to the wild area. And now today, what the wild area looks like is this. It's got 6 times the budget, 6 times the number of employees, covers a much bigger area, and is a functional, welcome member of its society. So you take a classical national park and you convert it to something that's basically a farm, okay? A garden, right? So on the front door, you put the word development. It's the only national park in the world that has the word development on its front door. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, they'll be all over the world, I'm certain. But right now, the concept of a park is protect it and keep people out. Our concept is how can we have them in without damaging the biodiversity, okay? Now, it starts with kids. First thing we did was take money that was invested for buying land to make the park bigger and all that kind of stuff, a chunk of that money, and use it and say, okay, these 4th graders, the 5th graders, 6th graders in school are going to be the adults 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now. That is the protection of your park. That is the beginning of integration. So these are farm kids, 5th grade. Teacher sends us a photograph of one of them nicely handling a snake, a live snake, so that it can explain it to the other kids in his class in the forest on our budget. That's what the teacher saw. That's why we got the photograph. But I didn't see that in the photograph. What I saw in the photograph was 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5 cell phones in that photograph participating in the interview with that crop. And at that moment, 40 or 50 or 100 other kids are also participating in that interview through that cell phone. That is the world we're living in today. And that is the world the whole park has to survive into indefinitely, okay? We're talking about communicating with the rest of the world. Now, these farm kids have family incomes for 3 or 4 or 5 members of a family in total of perhaps $15,000 a year, and everyone has got a cell phone in their pocket. That is the world that we're dealing with, okay? So here's all the wild areas of Costa Rica. All the white there is the wild of Costa Rica, and if you like, the pilot project for BioAlpha is this piece up here, the ACG, Article Social Guanacaste, that has taken a Costa Rican government said in 1986, sounds okay as an idea as long as it doesn't cost us anything. And our comment was, we're not asking you for money, we're asking for political permission. Okay. I don't know what your best national park is, but imagine somebody on a Cambodian passport comes to Norway and says, you know what, I want to run your best national park the way I want to run it. What would your reaction be? Okay. So these are the crops. Now, when we take that and we expand this pilot project to the whole country, we're looking at 1 million species of things, literally 1 million species of things. Europe might end up at the end of the day with 300,000 species of things that are multicellular, big enough to hold in your hand and look at. And Costa Rica is sitting there on 1 million of them. And easily 80% of them do not have names. All right. So now we got this problem here. We want the world to appreciate and work with, but there's no name tags on any of them. Okay? So you start out first getting some, all right? And notice that these are not university students, these are not PhDs, these are not graduate students, these are not summer vacation university students. These are people who maybe made it through 4th or 5th or 6th grade, pulled out of the rural workforce and taught how to do inventory. And this is where we start out, way back in the 70s, doing this kind of stuff. They're called parataxonomists. The word is like paramedic. And what they're doing is catching individual insects off of this light put out in the forest. And they're also rearing caterpillars in these bags, taking care of all of it, databasing all of it, photographing all of it, doing that kind of stuff. And they produce a product, museums with specimens in it, like that, inventory. Fine. This is 2003, that photograph. That's before DNA barcoding came on the scene. And that's where we were stuck. We were filling museums with drawers and drawers and drawers of specimens being worked on and thought about over the next 10 or 100 years, or 200 years. That's not a time scale that can work with integrating with society. This is effectively a museum with a huge number of Costa Rican specimens, effectively a morgue, frozen in time, not being integrated with society, with its society at all. And at that time, in 2003, this crazy university professor, who's at the other meeting on the other side over there at this moment, got the idea of taking just a little piece of DNA and realizing suddenly that it could be the identifier for all the members of a species on a planet. Every human being in this room has the same DNA barcode as every Aborigine, as every Eskimo, as every New Zealander, as everybody living in Northern Europe. They're all the same because you're one species, all right? And it's different from that of every dog. And it's different from that of one species of butterfly and one species of cockroach. So suddenly we have a unique identifier, which is just a little tiny piece, 650 base pairs of your DNA, or of anybody's DNA, okay? So now suddenly we have a technical solution to something that's been bugging society for 500 years. Okay, it's called DNA barcoding. So what's the routine? You take a piece off, you get a leg off this butterfly or a little moth right here. These are the hands of the former school bus, the former wife of the school bus driver, and put it in a hole in a little plastic plate here. You send the plastic plate to a building in Canada, which is acting like the old Kodak factory where you sent your rolls of film to get developed. And it goes into this robot here, and out of the robot comes barcodes. So this is the barcode for that fly. It's a 650-letter word made on an alphabet of 4 letters. And everybody's got it. Every human being's got the same one. And a machine can read it like that. Now, people who work with this stuff can read that like it was a word in a textbook. I can't. But when I put this up here some time ago, one person in the audience put their hand up and said, "Oops, that barcode doesn't go with that fly." I had to look up and discover they were correct. It didn't go with that fly. So I had to go get the right one to go with the fly. This turns out to be from a moth. Okay. It's the same as the barcode on a can of tuna fish. With that barcode, you can tell me everything about that can, what's in it, where it is, and it's unique. That barcode only applies to this species of cans of tuna fish. And it might only apply to this box full of tuna fish, okay? So this comes along right at this moment when we were still having the human identifier do all the identifying work for everything, which was a big, big roadblock. This is Ian Gall, the very best ichneumoniid wasp taxonomist in the world. I could walk into his office in the British Museum with a wasp in my hand. He'd say, "That came from Thailand, didn't it?" Or, "That came from Brazil." Or, "How did you find that thing in Europe?" I mean, that's the level. But we're looking at 50 years of spending your life doing this, all right? And we would, like, every year, take a box full of these wasps to him. And just take him days and days to identify all the wasps in that box. And as you can see here, they kind of look similar, all right? So this time, looking at that box, there it is, I said to myself, no, I'll DNA barcode every wasp in the box before I give it to Ian. And I'll take out the ones I can identify by their barcode, or really a machine can identify by their barcode. Okay. Here's what's left. Those are all new species, which had never been seen before. So the machine didn't have a barcode for them. There was nothing they could be compared with. And so this is where he puts his time, in identifying those. But all the other stuff, the machine did it. Replaced his 50, 60 years of experience. So suddenly we have a way of dealing with those huge masses of species that don't have any names. Okay? That's the end today. Those people are gone, and they're not going to be replaced. Our society will not replace them. So this idea of machine identification comes just at the right time. These people all have the gray hair that I do. They're retiring, retired, or dead. Okay? So let's take and apply this. There's a box full of butterflies, very common butterflies in Central and South America, in gardens everywhere. Every politician knows this because it's been in the flowers in his backyard, okay? This box full of butterflies, our best taxonomists looked at that box and said, I think there's more than one species in this box, but I can't quite figure it out. So we gave them a leg from all the things in the box. 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, the people in Guelph, Canada, in the factory, come back at us and say, Dan, there's 10 species in that box of things that all had one name for more than 100 years. And then you suddenly realize that, whoa, we've been looking at biology and biodiversity all wrong. There's a whole lot of things out there that we think are one name. How many giraffes are there in the world? You all think you know giraffes. There are 6 species of giraffes in Africa. There are 3 species of orca whales. There are 2 elephants in Africa. Okay? This looks like one species. It's 2. And each caterpillar that goes with it eats either one family or the other family. And the barcodes tell them apart, no problem. Okay? That's 5 species who look identical. And they've been called identical, Scotura leucophyps, like for a very long time. The world record right now is 39 species of little black wasps hiding under one name for more than 100 years. And these were all thought as being generalists. They eat many different species of caterpillars. But when you barcode them and you know this one is this, and this is this, and this, and this, you discover each one of them eats a different species of caterpillar. Little parasitic wasp. Each one kills a different species of caterpillar. Specialization is rampant, and we have been pooling it all under these one things called a Latin name. Okay. So what does BioAlpha do to Costa Rica? In effect, it says, let's barcode the whole country. Right? Let's find out all of them, everything, the million species plus. So what will that actually mean? That means you know what it is. It means you know where it is. It means you know what it does, because where you found it begins the ecological footprint to doing what it does, and finally how to find it when you want it. Okay? In other words, it's building a telephone directory. Okay? And then you put it on the internet so everybody can use it. School children, commercial people, teachers, farmers, regulatory agencies, police, you name it. It's like opening up the encyclopedia. And everybody gets to read the encyclopedia. Notice? Not just a few people, not just the priests in their castle. Okay? These are the people who've been doing this now for 30 years in the ACG. It proves they can do it. And they're all local farm workers pulled out of the local farming communities and taught how to do this stuff. We don't have to have a PhD doing it. We don't have to have a postdoc doing it. Sure, those people are welcome to be a part of the system. But the labor force to find everything in a country is certainly not going to be just what's in universities. Okay? Those people work in the ACG all over it. You know, the red circles are where they'd have their rearing barns. But in addition to doing this inventory and now starting the barcoding of the ACG, see the yellow dots? That's where they're the sole managers, if you like, the guards. Because people will say, well, if you got all these people out there collecting insects and plants and fungi and all that sort of stuff, who's guarding the place? They are the guards. They are presence. They are neighbors. They are part of the system. Okay? They're embedded in the entire workforce that manages the whole place. The teachers, the accountants, the road builders, the cooks, the ecotourist guides, the whole process. They're part of that process, which is called turning it into a garden. So when you start out to barcode the whole country, you're taking the first step to gardening the whole country. So the whole country turns into a garden, not just a park. Okay? And you name a species after every single one of these people. Now it's not just the donor who writes a $20 million check who gets a species named after him. It's that guy who stands out there in the sweat and the heat and the rain for 365 days a year looking for caterpillars, who also has a name after himself, okay, or herself. So now we go to the website, and we drill into the website, and on it we discover these icons. Behind each icon is what we call a species page. It's a natural history account of that butterfly, written by the person who reared it. One of those parataxonomists who's never written a sentence in their life, but they learn how to write a sentence in order to produce a species page. So you end up with a text, very clumsy from a, this is like written by a fourth grader, right? But it's about something they know about because they did it themselves. And they take the pictures themselves. And they put it up on the web. And they take it down from the web. In the process, they learn all the stuff you expect of a good university student. Okay? When I was a young man, I learned from butterfly books. I learned from, thin sheets of wood with chicken tracks on them. Not today. Okay? These things are looked at by students from Chile to northern Mexico all the time. Okay? Written by the parataxonomists in the field about the things they understand. This is how you begin to integrate the wild stuff with the society itself. Okay? And this is the author of that page 30 years ago. A professional fish killer. The threat to wild biodiversity. You take him out of that and you make him a discoverer of wild biodiversity. A manager, a micromanager of wild biodiversity, okay? Now you do this to everybody, all 5 million people at one level or another, okay? So what's the mechanics of getting everybody involved? Well, this thing is another innovation, if you like. It's been around for a long time, but it's not been already applied this way. It's called a malaise trap. It's like a tent with a door open, and flying insects go inside. They can't get out. They try to go up the ceiling to get out, and there's a hole, and they go into a bottle of alcohol, okay? So it's called a malaise trap. Anyone can put that trap out anywhere, okay? Doesn't require any complex education at all. Doesn't require even knowing anything about biology, really. And the insects then fall in this bottle of alcohol right there, which is the same one that's over there. And we put out 3 traps. There's one at the point of each arrow there. Cloud forest, edge, rainforest, a little more towards the Caribbean, dry forest towards the Pacific. And we ask, what do we catch in that trap in a whole year, in those 3 traps in a whole year? Well, this is what we get. Each circle represents the number of species that fell in those 3 traps, okay? And I want to point out two things about it. First, 17,000 species of insects, or 18,000 species of insects, were caught by those 3 traps in 1 year. That's probably a third of the species that are in Norway. Okay, 3 traps stuck in 3 places for 1 year. Now you do this on a countrywide basis, you're looking at millions of species. Okay. The second thing is we ask how much overlap is between these 3. How much do they have in common? Are they just repeating? There were 31 individuals out of 18,000. 31 species out of 18,000 that occurred in the 3 traps. So those traps are sampling enormous pools of different species. Okay. So we have all these insects, and now we have a way we can identify them. What kind of work can they do for us? And what's a conspicuous, useful work? I'll show you one example. It was actually done before barcoding, and we don't know who did the work because it was before barcoding. Okay. This is our northern neighbor, a beginning orange plantation. These are young orange trees, just stuck in the ground. They're just a few months old. 4 years later, they're yielding enormous quantities of orange, the orange juice that you drank for breakfast this morning. Okay? So we're not talking industrial levels of oranges. And they go into an industrial machine which juices them and splits the rind off. And out of the rind, they extract essential oils, which is worth more than the orange juice is, incidentally. So now what have I just set up for you? Trailer truckloads of waste orange peels. What do you do with trailer truckloads of orange peels? I mean, thousands of truckloads, okay? So we had estimating 500,000 species there, wild species, about which we knew nothing, or basically very little. I bet somebody will like to eat orange peels. Okay? I can't eat orange peels. You can't eat orange peels, but somebody will. Okay? So we asked them for 100 truckloads of orange peels dumped in a national park. Now, don't try this in your backyard, but this is a 400-year-old pasture in a national park. We dumped 100 trailer truckloads into that, and this is the first truckload right there. That's when he'd taken a photograph of it. 6 months later, it looked horrible. It's just, black tar, smell like Cointreau, but basically goop. 18 months later, not a trace. All gone. And with a whole new set of vegetation growing up. Who did the work? Fly larvae. 3 or 4 species, we think, of fly larvae who feed normally on wild fruits in the forest. It came out of the forest and found, wow, look at all the rotten fruit, and laid a gazillion eggs, and their larvae plowed that up, let the oxygen in, their fungi, their bacteria, and they themselves ate it all. So now you have a natural process that's useful. So you go back to the orange juice company and you say, all right, we'll take 1,000 of your truckloads in a national park of orange peels. And there you're seeing, that's 1,000 truckloads of orange peels dumped in a national park. Okay? 6 months later, looks horrible. Okay, looks like end of the world. That's about 1.5 feet deep. I mean, like that deep layer. 5 years later, all gone. Young trees growing up all over it. Succession on its way, restoring tropical forest with waste material from the agro-industry. Okay. I won't give you the rest of it, but just say that our bugs were doing $600,000 a year worth of work for the orange juice industry at this time. Okay. So now we can get more complicated. This is the edge of the conservation area of the World Heritage Site here. This is private land. It's really government land, but it's treated like private land by the National Electric Company, who wants to drill into there for a geothermal resource, which is underneath it like that. Okay? So how do you get that hot water and steam out of there without damaging the forest up above? And if you do damage, how much damage is it? Where is it? Who's being damaged? And all that kind of stuff. So here's the drill site like this. Now, this is not petroleum. This is drilling to get hot water and steam to run a turbine. Okay. So you cut a hole out of the forest like that. And they came to us after hearing us say to them, why don't we work together at this and see if we can figure out a way to do this instead of the way industry normally does things? And so they heard that message, and basically they opened up their door and said, okay, you can come and study us as though it's a big scientific experiment. Okay, now that's a major concession, and I have to say at the time that was very far-sighted middle management who allowed that happen, said, don't tell the bosses. Okay, so we didn't. Well, everybody kind of knew, but nobody officially knew. So they allowed us to put in those malaise traps that I just showed you that collect all those insects at the beginning when the first bomb hits that forest. And you can see what the rainforest looks like when you turn it into a drill site. Okay, there's the trap right there. Right there. Now the site's being polished, and there's the trap still right there, recording. Now they're drilling, their trap's still right there, recording. What's it recording? It's recording all the insects that are going back and forth through that world. Okay, but to go back, see there's 3 stars. There's one at the edge here, one 50 meters in, and one 150 meters in. That was repeated at 3 places. And out comes a whole lot of insects, which nobody could possibly identify. So you wouldn't be able to say, are they the same near the traps or near the drill site, or are they the same in the forest or whatever, because they can't be identified. But with barcodes, they can all be identified. In 6 months, 144,000 individual insects were identified with barcodes by that factory in Canada. Okay. One trap caught 8,000 species in that time. Okay. At a cost of in those days of $3.14 an insect. We are now at the end of this year down to $1 an insect. The point is, this is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So now with this hard data, a very interesting phenomenon takes place. Engineers detest tree huggers. Engineers want to build roads, buildings, whatever. And of course, the tree hugger always comes around and says, no, you can't. You can't destroy that dam. You can't destroy that forest. It's terrible, visually terrible. It's polluting, it's contaminating, it's doing. So there's a constant little war going on between them. But suddenly we have the park working with the industrials. But we're not still out there waving our arms. What we do is put real numbers like this up here and graph the numbers of insects caught by each trap. So there's a bunch of different traps, and they all run along here and then one trap that does this, very different from the others. All of a sudden, you're speaking a language that engineers can understand and remember and think about and apply to their own work. Okay. So at that point, then suddenly you have an audience. You have a set of potential partners. And I can't go on and on about the details here. I just want to point out that when we get done with this thing after the first year, this trap right here, right on the margin, of course, is very different from inside the forest. The insect community, very, very different. But 50 meters in and 150 meters in, the insects say, we don't even know that drilling site is there. And 50 meters, you can see the drilling site. It's right there in front of you. But the insects, it's the same as the forest was beforehand. I.e., the damage done by this site is very well defined. So that's where the first focus went. Aha, now we know where the damage, now we know what they have to pay for, now we know what they have to mitigate. And they were very happy to have that very specific thing instead of just a whole bunch of very angry tree huggers like us, which we are, out there blasting them for doing an industrial project in a piece of very nice original rainforest. So here it is looking down from the air. Scratching your head and thinking about it, and suddenly it dawns on me. That's not a drilling platform. That's a landslide. What's a landslide? The rock, the dirt, and all the vegetation goes to the bottom, leaving a big bare hole. That's what the drilling site is. Then you think about that, wait a minute now, if we can think of that as a landslide, and national parks are full of landslides. This is a national park, and you could see the landslides on the mountainside up there. But then somebody, good biologist, says, well, wait a minute now, over 10 or 20 or 30 years, the forest comes in and fills in the landslide again, but that's not going to happen to your drill site. It's going to stay open. And you think, yeah, okay, that's true. And then suddenly you realize there is another kind of opening in nature. A river running through a national park, which is what this is. You look down at it, and what do you see? You see a permanent edge. This is permanently different from this, and permanently different from this. Nobody complains. Well, this is effectively the drill site, and this is its edge, and this is the forest 150 meters inside. Okay? So suddenly you change the sociological situation of a relationship between society and wild nature. Okay? So now you're going to think, okay, how do we, this was in one place. How do we spread this over an entire country? Okay? Well, the way an academic thinks is you get a big grant and you go out and you hire a whole lot of students, a whole lot of postdocs, a whole lot of technicians and so on, and they set in like an invading army to do this to the country. Wait a minute, that doesn't work. You want the country to figure itself out. So where's the workforce? Well, these people that you see setting up, learning how to set up a malaise trap, are the staff from national parks. So you bring them in, the guys who carry guns, you bring them in, and you show them how to set up the malaise trap. You give them a malaise trap, and you send them home. You don't go, you send them home. And they go out and start to find the things in their own national park. So suddenly it's their farm that they are investigating. That changes the relationship. I don't know if they've ever been a guard for anything, but it is the most boring job in the world. Okay? Suddenly they're doing something with the forest that they're protecting. Okay? The bottle of insects right here is from 1 week from one trap. There's probably 500 species of insects at least in that bottle, out of maybe 2,000 individual insects. Most, if not all, but let's say 95% of those species don't have names. They're undescribed. But we can barcode them and know who they are. Okay? So this is where those parks are, the yellow stars all over the country. So now as I'm talking to you, I don't have to be out there micromanaging it. I don't have to be out there setting the traps, collecting the insects and all that kind of stuff. They are doing it. Well, I'm up here being a lawyer for them, okay? And the red stars are where the commercial, private community is paying the bill to do this. For the national parks, I thought what we were going to have to do was raise the money outside to cover the cost of doing the DNA barcoding, because that has a laboratory cost, okay? The Costa Rican government, after this got started, came along and said, okay, we'll put $1 million on the table now to cover the cost for these trap results the first year, which is what it'll do. That'll cost about $1 million to process in the laboratory the insects that are going to come out of those yellow stars. And just last week, an anonymous donor matched that. Okay. Now, those are small money for, if you like, pilot projects. The country as a whole is going to cost a lot more than that. But the point is simply that now the government is deciding, this begins to have the kind of value that schools and highways and internet and hospitals and all that kind of stuff have for the country as a whole. Okay? Now, this is a very striking photograph. These people went back to their own park, and they set up their own trap, and they made their own web page, and they put their own web page on the internet to show the world what they were doing. That's pride. That's me developing my farm, okay? What I see in that photograph is something very interesting. Here's two guys. There's a gun on his hip right there. There's a gun on his hip right there. What we're doing is contaminating the police. The police are being touched by bioliteracy. So suddenly being police isn't my sole occupation. I'm not just a guard. sitting around with a gun on my belt. The jaguar picture below is 250 meters from where that trap is. These guys are really out in the forest, okay? And that's where it's all going. Now, this piece of legislation right here is actually a permit the government put together to carry this out everywhere. Costa Rica doesn't do that, but they did. They came up with a permit to do this everywhere. Okay? You can do it everywhere in all the high schools in the country. Every yellow dot is a high school. You can do it in every farm, real farm in the country. And there are byproducts all over the place. This is one of the insects gets caught in the trap. Here it is squashed on my hand, and in that blood, we can ask by barcoding, what was it feeding on? What diseases did it have inside of it? The byproducts go on and on and on. We can put Malaise traps up and down those mountains and monitor the disappearance of the clouds with climate change. This is getting everybody working together. And the government has finally decided that this is national importance in a formal sense. And this is the president signing the decree just last week that made it a formal national priority, okay, for the country. This is the actual decree itself. But it's part of a global thing. The whole world is doing this in various ways. Okay? Norway's included. And Norway, your membership in this whole system is right there doing this to Norway. Okay? Bioscan is a new program just invented by the people over here in the other meeting, and it's to basically enforce this globally. Okay? And that's the folder, and so this is really what's happening. GPS tells you where you are with coordinates. DNA barcoding tells you where you are in the biodiversity world. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. We're going to do Q&A. So, Winnie, do you want to come up?
Yeah, Winnie will. I am almost deaf. This ear over here doesn't work at all, and this ear just barely works. So Winnie has to hear what you ask and sort of tell me close into my ear.
Okay. And we also have, we have some microphones. So should I point and you
Yes, if
interpret?
you would. But could I also ask a favor? In my life, with good hearing, but with a high volume coming out of his mouth and with a high volume coming out of other things around, I may be losing my hearing too. So may I have an auxiliary? We have ear number 1 and we have ear number 2.
Okay. I'm happy to be ear number 2, especially to you guys. Okay, so do we have any questions?
There's a one way back over there.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. Very, very interesting. I was just wondering, with all the orange peels, it was a very monotonous insect feeding. What happened with the insects afterwards?
Ah, the Orange Restoration Project.
Yes.
You only showed one of the insect species eating. You
Right.
mentioned there were more, but it was before barcoding.
Right.
The question was, what happened to all of the insects afterwards? You left out a lot of the life that actually happened during this project, and
Sure.
we conveniently have a questioner to bring up.
Okay, I'll add a little more. That story goes on for hours. Okay, so, but
We have at least half an hour.
the natural flies from the forest came out, and of course they found this huge food source, and they laid a very large number of eggs, and they produced a very, very, very large number of larvae, who then made yet more flies, who made yet more eggs, and so the numbers in that plot eventually must have been literally billions. Everybody and the little brother who eats flies came in flies. The birds were all over that thing all the time, getting free lunch, basically. The flies themselves would have gone back to the forest, and basically the amount of food available, they would have starved to death, to put it bluntly. They would have dropped out of the system.
But many were eaten.
Yeah, and these are not house flies. These are flies who live normally in the forest. So there would have been a big pulse of flies going back into the forest from that operation. But like I say, either they were being consumed by predators or they'd simply die of starvation. Okay.
But just about anything that eats insects, this was a rich source. Bats at night, lizards, on and on and on.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but the thing is that it does not produce a rolling contamination that then goes off across the countryside and causes problems, that sort of thing. What it does is simply, now, like I say, you don't do this in your backyard. I wouldn't suggest you do this in the middle of a village. But what it does say is that a big chunk of wasteland, which is just, brush and young trees and that kind of stuff, is perfect for that kind of biodegradation of raw agricultural material.
Dan also did not emphasize that the area that we chose to put it was an old, 100 years or more, degraded cattle pasture that had introduced species of grass on it, was vulnerable to fires all the time. The orange peels are basically a lot of compost that turned that into the real wild vegetation, fire-resistant, much richer, and a deep pool of good soil.
Can I have moderator's prerogative and ask a follow-up question, which is, I know from writing about your work that a competing orange juice company stopped this project. Has there been any progress on that?
Yeah, here's basically what happened was, I never went to Harvard Business School, right? So the innocence on my part was that when we gave this advantage to our orange juice company by doing this, the competing orange juice company was 70 kilometers away.
Previously a monopoly.
Worked with a green mail agent to take our company to court for having damaged a national park. That went all the way to the Supreme Court of Costa Rica. And the suits and ties up here in San Jose, who knew nothing about the biology of this stuff and refused to listen about the biology of it, eventually ended up saying, you have to cancel the contract. Okay, so the project died at that point. That cost our orange juice company $100,000 worth of legal fees. And so if you go back to them and say, what do you want? Well, let's do it some more. Now they're gun shy, but they're not stupid. They went across the road, bought a piece of old land private, not part of the park, and repeat the thing over there themselves already, with air-conditioned tractors doing the stirring and adding stuff to it and putting fancy roads in and lights and guards and all that, making it look like a formal industrial site. That cost them $600,000 a year to manage that site. Our site cost $3,000 a year. That's why I say our bugs are doing $527,000 worth of work.
And that was not the end of the story. When you're involved in conservation, inevitably what happens, it's hard for us, but for the people who work alongside with us, we see them working extremely hard, often not being recognized for what they're doing, and there are times when they get into a lot of trouble. So chapter 2 of this was when the Supreme Court ruled on this case. They not only said, one judge was the deciding vote, and he said, I don't really understand this enough, so I'll vote on the side of protecting the park. They also ruled that we had to remove all of the orange peels. Now, this was years afterwards. Obviously, there were no orange peels left.
Watch your clock.
No, we're good, I think.
We're all right. But
I'm in control.
Thank you. But the other company and their green mailer then attacked again, and this time they channeled their attack at the director of the park and at the head of investigation for a possible criminal penalty case for not having carried out the Supreme Court requirement of removing the orange peels. So this actually went to court for a number of reasons, it actually lasted several years. It was extraordinarily difficult for us to watch these good people suffering for all all the right things. We also saw every witness who came to the project and really looked at it, saw how good the project was, and it was eventually ruled in our favor. But that, there are things that happen when you're trying to do the right thing that there's a cost to it, and particularly to your allies.
Other questions out there? Here?
I work with waste solutions, and is there any way that we can, well, will it work the same way here in Norway if we use the food garbage to maybe use it like that over here?
Gentleman works in waste solutions, and he's wondering about applying this in Norway by using food waste. What would happen in Norway, both in areas that are close to forest or remote from forest? What would happen here?
Well, the very important thing is that if you're going to use natural biodegradation, there needs to be a source of the biodegraders. So I would say that the first, let's just say it's fish waste, just as to pick something out of the sky, or some agricultural crop waste. I would say what you would do is start out with a few truckloads, and you deposit it in places that have forest there, places that have open tundra kind of circumstances, and give it a year and see who comes to eat it. Spread it out. Now, that's something I didn't emphasize in the talk. The trucks dump the stuff, and then they send a bulldozer in, and the bulldozer leveled the whole thing to a layer about that thick to start off with. But use a small amount, a truckload, 2 truckloads, 3 truckloads, as a probe to see where the organisms are, whether they're flies or beetles or fungi or whatever they are, and at what rate they work. And then once you find a place where you put down those truckloads and 6 months later, there's not a trace of them, you know you've got a spot that's got the right organisms to do the job, and then you go for something big. So remember, that was our first 100 truckloads, was an experiment. That for me as a scientist was a flat-out experiment. I had no idea what was going to happen, all right? We did the big thing of the 1,000 truckloads after we saw what happened with the little patch. And it's in any of these restoration projects, it's always good to do a few kind of small-scale experiments first and just see what happens, and then build a big, more industrial level thing based on the small-scale outcomes.
And obviously, don't pick a good piece of forest or a good piece of tundra. Pick somewhere that needs restoration itself. But the principle is basically composting. You know, when you take orange peels without the essential oils, it's just wet cellulose. It's a wonderful material.
But remember also, you have to think about the other people who live nearby. You don't want to do this, I say jocularly, in your backyard, but you don't want to do it next to a town where suddenly there's going to be a whole lot of people in the town that are going to object to the odor or the extra flies that appear or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for your presentation and from your congratulations with the project, and thanks a lot for your work. First, I wanted to say that. And the second thing, curious to what has been the impact at a high political level in neighboring countries of your project?
That's a good question.
What has been the impact of having supported a high political level in neighboring countries to Costa Rica?
Neighboring countries. That's a difficult question because, of course, small tropical countries are mostly in very strong competition with each other. So when they copy something from another country, generally they don't they don't do things that make it visible that they're copying another country. The one that we see clearly is the education program. We do all 4th, 5th, and 6th grade students in 53 schools around the conservation area. That has self-exported itself by people learning about it to Honduras and to Panama, and now they're talking about Nicaragua. It's always slow because the jealousy, the envy, the thin sense of competition between these countries means that it's not an open, fluid transfer of information. So it's slow. But the only one I can put my finger on that's visible, as I say, is Panama and Honduras and now Nicaragua. They literally come, people say, will you come to our country and explain all this? And I say, no. You send somebody from your country to us and have them spend a week or whatever it is doing an x-ray. And you take home what pieces of this seem to fit your cultural and biological circumstances. Because we come from the school that says no one shirt fits all. You have to tailor-make the solutions to the particular sociology of the place, the particular biology of the place, and the particular social economics of the place. If it's a place with a lot of ecotourism, that's one thing. If it's a place where there's a lot of mining industry, it's a very different story. If there's a lot of people, very different than if there's only a few people, da-da-da-da-da. And so the exporting it, the influence neighboring, we have to have faith that it will be a slow process like a disease that spreads sort of under the table and begins to pop up in other places, except for the education one. That one is already in motion.
Okay, I have a cheerier look at it. One thing is, for Costa Rica's immediate neighbors, no, just as there's a little friction between Norway and Sweden on some issues, less so now, but there are frictions between neighbors. But other tropical countries are putting their eyes on it. In the other meeting that we're in, the International Barcode of Life, there have been forceful people, particularly in Colombia, Argentina, some other places, in Mexico, who have been approaching their government or gathering together a number of scientists and simply driving forward because they think it's the right thing to do. Many of them will point to this example of bioalpha in Costa Rica and say to their government, look, this is a logical, reasonable thing to do. We will get a lot of good things from this. Why not consider it? But I also want to point out that the project itself, that degree of national importance is less than 1 week old, so we don't know yet.
But on that point, there's one more thing here about the high-level politician interactions. UNESCO, the people who designate World Heritage Sites, has designated us quite some time ago to be a World Heritage Site. So they, for various occasions, various times, come and send commissions or visitor groups who come and see it and talk about it and say, oh, this is wonderful, da-da-da-da. So I say, well, why don't you package this kind of policy and put it into your World Heritage Sites in other Latin American countries? And the answer is, no, Dan, we can't do that. Because our policy has to work everywhere. Okay? In other words, you get the UN attitude, the World Bank attitude, the UN attitude. We have to have a general formula that we can apply downwards, the same shirt to everywhere. And we're obviously a tailor-made shirt for a tailor-made country in a tailor-made circumstance. And so the blockage begins to happen. It's very hard to get the CBD and these things to adopt these revolutionary ideas like development of a national park as part of their policy, because then you get different development in Guatemala and Chile and Argentina and Brazil. I mean, look at Brazil right now today. It's totally antagonistic to this kind of stuff. And so they feel they have to have a general purpose thing that can go from top down. And that, for my opinion, does not work very well at the level of actual conservation, of actual keeping the wild stuff in the game.
Which is actually particularly true for this biological field of conservation, because in biology, more than most other examples that I can think of, it is a local solution. The species are local. The eels in New Zealand, for example, mean something, are intertwined with the religion of the New Zealand people in a way that it's hard to transmit to other people. So in conservation, you need locally focused, strong drivers coming up everywhere.
Well, unfortunately, I think we have to round off and finish up, but thanks very much to Winnie Hallwachs and Dan Janzen for their wonderful work, which I've watched and admired from afar and been there too. And thanks to all of you for listening, and hope you'll find your way over to Olavshallen this afternoon for the afternoon program. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.